Welcome to the Spiritual Spotlight series, where we illuminate the sacred intersection of science, soul, and healing. Today's guest is someone who's truly transforming how we understand trauma, not just as something to cope with, but as a powerful portal of personal and spiritual awakening. Arielle Schwartz. I apologize. And the only reason why I'm mispronouncing her name is because I work with an archangel with the same name, but it's pronounced differently, and I'm having a hard time with it. Is a licensed clinical psychologist, a certified complex trauma professional, a yoga teacher, author of 7 profound books, and the founder of the Center for Resilience Informed Therapy. She's known around the world for her integrative, heart centered approach to healing trauma through the nervous system. In this conversation, we're going to explore why your body holds the key to your freedom, how healing ancestral and collective trauma can liberate your spirit, and the gentle, powerful ways you can begin to come home to yourself today. Dr. Schwartz, welcome to Spiritual Spotlight Series. It's truly an honor to share the sacred space with you.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's a joy.
I'm so happy. So let's just jump right in. Dr. Schwartz, you often speak about how our deepest pain can become the path to our healing. Could you maybe share a personal or clinical moment where trauma revealed the doorway to freedom?
Wow. There are so many moments, and
I'm sure.
yeah, I'm like, oh, wow. Like, where do I want to begin with that one? I think I just want to start out by kind of holding it broad, and I'm actually going to share a very personal story in relationship to it. So I think that so often we are afraid of the contractions or the painful spaces or where our body holds pain. And we work so hard, at least I do, right? Like I can work so hard to push away something that feels like it will be too much or feels so painful that I actually don't know how to relate to it. And there's wisdom in temporarily pushing stuff away until we feel like we have the resources to go toward it. And yet when we finally do have those resources, I think we've often heard this phrase, the only way out is through, but there is something really potent about recognizing
Yeah.
that when we feel robustly strong enough and ready and resourced, we can go towards even something that feels so hard, so impossible. So here's the story that comes to mind, and it's relatively recent. I have suffered with migraines on and off for
Mm.
much of my certainly like last 15 years. And I would
Oh,
say like very much with an onset of perimenopause and hormonal changes. And
yeah.
these migraines have been hormonally driven. But I also have been studying kind of the science of the body mind connection for years. So I recognize that hormonal states are also kind of access points to some of our unfinished business or the trauma of the past. That, in a sense, when we have certain windows within our cycle, like a drop in estrogen and so
Mm.
forth, it can kind of tumult us into these places in our psyche or in our bodies that carry unresolved wounds, unresolved pain.
Yeah.
And I had gone on a personal spiritual retreat and with the same teacher on a few occasions earlier this year. And one of the experiences that I had was around working with the way that some of my personal earliest childhood wounds really led me to feel so much pain, so much constriction, so much disconnection from my body. All right. So I'm on one of these retreats and I think, oh, I'm going to go receive teaching and I'm going to get to meditate. No, I'm literally on the drive to the retreat center. I get one of my worst migraines ever. And I am
Wow.
so sick. I spend the next 16 hours nauseous in bed, trying to be part of an experience. And at the same time, having this one little voice that was like beautifully showing up, accompanying me in the midst of a very painful contraction, saying, "You're not doing anything wrong. You're not being punished. This isn't because there's something wrong with you. Something is finally able to unwind. Trust this." So I'm like hearing this little voice of trust. And at the same time, like so incredibly uncomfortable in my body. And kind of fast forward to the next morning after I'd been up most of the night. And I was there with a friend and I told her what was happening for me. And I'm feeling, and I'm just going to in motion here, like
Right.
all of this gunk. Like the image that I had was, and I work a lot with the vagus nerve and nervous system healing. I felt like my whole vagus nerve was coated with tar, like sticky tar, that everything negative that I had experienced was stuck in it. And at the same time, I visualizing this as tar and breathing into this condensed, icky feeling began to move some energy, began to release something. And I could feel like this heavy, sticky thing, and it moves into my throat and moves into my face. And then all of a sudden, I get this impulse, again, that same trusting voice of like, listen to that, that says, go to your heart. And I bring all of my attention right here into my heart. And when I arrive there, there is this untouched place. It's like underneath all of this sticky tar and darkness of my wounds is this untouched place of pure light. And out of that comes what we'll call healing tears, right? Like there's tears, but at the same time, there is this sweet relief that something is able to let go through the gateway of my heart. And as the hot, very hot tears, that
Yeah.
feeling,
Yeah.
begin to release, it was like someone had pulled the plug out of the bottom of a bathtub with where all that dirty water was. And it
Right.
just all got to drain out. And by the end of that, I was still tired, but I was
Of
pain
course.
free. Right.
I love that. I love that you shared that. That's so interesting. As you're talking about the experience for your event, it's leading me to like my energy healing practices and when you tap into energetic systems, how they feel like tar. And I appreciate that you were able to find the spot within your heart space to bring forward this beautiful healing experience. That's so cool. I love
Yeah.
it. I'm like, wow. And I will say on a side note, this goes against your beautiful moment. I have venom in my head. Like, that like venom and the energy of that gunkiness of that, that like disgusting grossness energy that stuck to that gentleman.
Yes. Yes, yes, exactly. So, like, but and let me say this, like, we all know what it feels like
Yeah.
to be stuck. And I was stuck for
Yes.
a good 16 hours
Yeah.
and I've been stuck on and off for years with this migraine pattern. Trust me, it's uncomfortable. And
Right.
I get them monthly because they're hormonally driven. And yet to feel the both and I think especially that voice of like, you're not being punished,
Yeah.
you can trust this process. And I feel like each one of these journeys through the pain of contraction, whether it's because of a migraine or because I'm working through a trauma related memory, or whether
Right.
it's when I'm sitting with others who are working through trauma
Right.
related contractive emotional or physical experiences, that process of trusting that we're not just going into the dark woods because we're going to get stuck in the dark woods.
Yeah.
There is a path that takes us through and out the other side.
Yeah. And also, like you said, even though that you were uncomfortable, you were still willing to listen to that voice within and to ride the wave of the uncomfortable feeling to get to the other side.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
super important. So one of the things that Dr. Schwartz is doing right now, we're recording this in July. I'm not exactly sure when this is going to post, but the reason why I'm bringing this up is that she's in the middle of a 7-week immersion course with the Shift Network, which is nervous system healing, health restoration, strengthen vagal tone, and transform trauma through somatic practices and spiritual integration. The reason why I say that is that she has an amazing immersion program that's coming up in November. So some of the questions that we're going to ask today are going to touch on the program that she's doing right now that will lead us to the program in November. So I'm so excited about this. So your Shift Network course began with body-centered psychotherapies to awaken our true nature. Why is it so important to start the healing process with the body first?
Yeah. When we look at where the impact of trauma is, and I can borrow from Bessel van der Kolk's titled book here, The Body Keeps the
Oh,
Score, right? There is
yeah,
so much information that we have out there now that where trauma is living or lingering or felt within us, yes, maybe there's an image or a narrative, beliefs that we're carrying, and we want to work with all of those layers. But if we don't also work with where the body shows up in the story, we can only get so far with our healing. I've been a somatic therapist for 30 years. I started training in this work in 1996, so about 30 years. And I was initially drawn to study somatics and body centered psychotherapies because I struggled with my own childhood trauma. And it led to a tremendous amount of somatic experience in me, both in terms of kind of chronically being ill as a child, having a lot of brain fog, having a lot of fatigue, really suffering in the way that those somatic experiences kind of interlocked with experiences of shame and unworthiness and so forth. I very strongly felt and I'll say why I felt this, but I felt so strongly that going towards the body was the key to unwind all of that. And here's why. Here's why. You know, when I was a kid, I also had early introductions to things like yoga and movement and dance and things like that. Time in nature. I consistently felt better when I was moving. Fast forward into my early 20s, I get back into yoga. I'm feeling highly anxious in my life. I am going through some depression, but when I would go to yoga, I would come home to myself. I got a sense of freedom. And I really wanted to understand, why does moving my body help me feel better? Right. And I know it's not just me.
yeah,
Look, like, this is a huge industry in our world. Many people are drawn to movement
so
because
true.
it changes something. Right.
Yeah.
And so I have been studying the science of this, the somatic experience of it, both personally and guiding others. And I would say the kind of the spiritual nature of this
Yeah.
as well for the better part of my life at this stage.
I think that's amazing. And I do, it's very interesting when you go and you move your body and you're outside in nature and how clearer you feel and opened and the energy shifts. And I just think it's fascinating to me how just by putting your feet on the ground, and I know you can go off on a tangent on that as long. I'm having a moment. I always get like so excited whenever I meet someone as amazing as yourself. I'm like, oh, I love everything. So, but I do want to ask you this. So many people today feel exhausted, anxious, or chronically dysregulated, but they don't always connect it to trauma. What are some of the subtle but maybe powerful signs the nervous system is calling for restoration?
Yeah, yeah. So when we think about being out of balance or dysregulated, what we're really speaking about, in a sense, is the language of the nervous system.
Mm,
Right? The nervous system has various states that ultimately need to kind of live in some form of homeostasis. And the
yeah,
states, if we put it most simply put, are the states of mobilizing us, expanding us, moving us in the world, which our
yeah,
sympathetic nervous system does. And the converse of that is the stillness, the restfulness, the immobilization, the quiet, which our parasympathetic nervous system does for us. Now, so often when we hear the word sympathetic nervous system or stress response, we think that's only in response to something negative or bad.
right.
But the truth is, we we need to be able to mobilize in the world to play, to feel empowered, to get exercise, to feel excitement. And I think so often when we're thinking about restoration, we're only thinking about the quieting side of the equation. Like we just need to go into calm or restful states. And that's part of the story, but it's not the whole story because sometimes we can go into stillness, into quieting, but instead of it being restorative, it takes us into shutdown, heaviness, stagnancy, fatigue. And so, what we're really looking for with regulation of our nervous system is the ability to move rhythmically and easefully between movement and stillness, sympathetic, parasympathetic, moving out into the world and going into stillness. And we're not stuck here in restlessness, irritability, anxiety, and we're not stuck here in fatigue, shutdown, collapse. And so we have this capacity to feel enough safety to navigate that range of nervous system states in a way that lets us kind of know, I can handle that. I've got this.
I love that. It's almost like helping you to feel balanced and whole and okay with just how you're feeling inside and not going from one extreme to the next and just moving through the day to day. I like that. I'm just thinking about my own like my personal life. Like I run a doctor's office and it can get very stressful at times. So I'm just like, I'm gonna sign up for this course, everyone. I'm gonna it's so important. So one of your specialties is applied polyvagal theory. Can you maybe explain in simple terms what vagal tone is and why strengthening it is such a foundational step in trauma recovery?
Yeah. So, applied polyvagal theory, a lot of fancy words there, but basically what we're doing is applying the science of the vagus nerve into things like yoga or into somatic therapies or into psychotherapy in general. And polyvagal, the big fancy word in there, stands for poly being multiple and vagal referring to the vagus nerve. Okay. Our vagus nerve is our 10th cranial nerve. It's kind of gets a lot of hype in pop psychology nowadays. And it's for a lot of good reasons. It's our mind body superhighway of connection. So, what does polyvagal mean? It means that we have multiple vagal circuits. We have a vagus nerve circuit that moves into the kind of upper arenas of our face and our throat and our heart and lungs that helps us navigate a sense of I feel safe and connected in the world. I'm able to really orient towards a connection in a way that helps to regulate my nervous system. So we recognize within this perspective that our connections with others and the world around us is a source of what we call co-regulation, meaning all of that regulation of my own nervous system doesn't have to be my own heavy lifting. I actually get to lean in to the cues that you give me of safety and connection through your voice tone and your facial expressions and your sweet nod and your smile and so forth, right? And the second vagal circuit is one that goes down into all of our digestive and reproductive organs for the purpose of rest and digest. Now, all of that is in the context of safety. Polyvagal theory recognizes that we go through kind of a predictable response when we experience a threat or something that doesn't feel safe or is dangerous to us. We try and reestablish safety and connection. If that doesn't work, we try and protect ourselves or get away from the fight flight response. And if that doesn't work, our body has a built in protective mechanism
Mm.
that basically takes us into more of a feigned death or a collapse or a withdrawal response, all for the purpose of helping us survive what feels unsurvivable, what feels like a life threat.
Yeah.
Okay, one more thing to answer your question. What is vagal tone and why is it important? So, when we think about cultivating the health of the vagus nerve, this mind-body superhighway of communication, our vagus nerve helps us basically navigate that balance between our sympathetic and our parasympathetic response so that we can mobilize into empowerment and excitement and play and joy and go into healthy rest in the context of safety for the deepest restoration of our immune system, our digestive system, all of the systems of our body get to really be nourished by restful states without dropping off into collapse, without
Yeah.
dropping off into stagnancy.
Right.
So vagal tone represents that homeostatic balance of sympathetic and parasympathetic. And we can we can build on that by stimulating the vagus nerve so that it can do the best job possible helping us find that balance. Yeah.
That sounds so interesting. Wow. I mean, it's when you're working with your clients, and I know you've been teaching with the Chef Network, and I'm sure you do other seminars and classes and everything. You must have such profound transformations with your clients just by, educating them and giving them the tools. I know that one of the things I also find very interesting with what you do is you also address ancestral and collective trauma in your teachings, which is also very important. How do you see these legacies live on in our bodies, and what does it take to begin to release those as well?
Yeah. Yeah. So now we're speaking about the way in which the threat responses that we may have had or that the generations that preceded
Mm,
us may have had in response to the world and how epigenetically and environmentally they get passed on generation to generation. So I'll use kind of a classic example around this, which would be basically our core sense of secure attachment or insecure attachment, what we would call an attachment wound. So when we look at the experience of whether or not we feel loved, cared for, safe, protected, nurtured in our earliest parent-child relationship, and I'm going to use the mother infant because it's going to be relevant to this topic of epigenetics. Okay, so when we think about this, the cues of safety that a mother needs to give to the infant that helps the infant develop that autonomic nervous system and vagus nerve that helps ground them in a sense of safety. Okay, and let's imagine that there was generations of safety that got passed on from mother to infant, who then grows up and becomes a mother and is able to transmit those same cues and love and safety and lullabies and rocking and vocalizations and loving body language, right? That would be a genetic legacy of resilience. That would be an embodied legacy of resilience. And then, of course, we can all imagine the flip side of this. Let's imagine that we have, you don't have to go too far back, right? 2 generations ago, and I'm going to use my own family system for a moment just to ground this in a story. Go just 2 generations back, and in my family system, I have I'll go 3 generations in a sense, my great grandmother, who is pregnant with my grandmother. That's where the second generation comes in.
yeah.
My great grandmother's pregnant with my grandmother right at the time when, in my family history, the Jews in Ukraine were being forced into pogroms. And during that pregnancy, my great grandmother leaves her homeland, travels with 2 younger kids and her husband, leaving behind family members, leaving behind a country, a home, carrying only what they can carry,
Yeah.
and has to flee, right? Now imagine the stress neurochemistry that's infusing into that pregnancy of my grandmother.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah. And how that impacts the birth, the bonding phase, the attachment, the sense of this world, is it a safe place? Maybe it doesn't feel so safe right now.
Yeah.
And how that external environment of lack of safety is translating to the internal environment of the kind of stress cortisol soup that my grandmother's incubating in. All right, so then fast forward She comes into the world and grows up again with her own perhaps attachment wounds or deficiencies, takes that into adulthood, has two children, is living through the Great Depression, is living through World War One and
Wow.
Two, because she was quite, it's a kind of long story here, but my mother was born when my grandmother was 50. So my
Mm,
grandparents were born in the late 1890s.
wow.
So having lived through, my grandfather, my mother's father, fought in World War One, right? So without going into all of the stories, but you get
Right.
the flavor of how
Yeah.
this may have impacted her capacity to bond or feel safe
Right.
with my mother, who was an unexpected, oops, wait a second, I'm having a child at 50 in
That's a
1940,
big,
right?
yeah.
In
Yeah.
1941, whoa, right? And I have to just give a huge shout out to my mom for a moment, because my mom's a psychologist
I
and
love
she was a
that.
cycle breaker. She started the journey,
Chills.
right? She started the journey of getting into therapy, of doing her own work. And she endowed me not only with certain unfinished business of the generational trauma, but also with a tremendous amount of generational resilience.
Yeah.
And whether, I'm speaking to our listeners for a moment, but whether
Of
you're
course.
listening to this and you're thinking, my parent wasn't that cycle breaker, but maybe you are that cycle breaker
So
in
true.
which you're doing the heavy lifting. And, I got to do some heavy lifting too. It didn't all stop with my mom, right? But she
Right.
caught a lot, right? And I get to do some of that heavy lifting to make this world a better place, whether it's for my children or for the people that I get to support in the world, right? To
Right.
really heal my nervous system so that I can provide sources of nourishment and care and safety for others.
I love that. Wow. What an interesting like life story and how you're able to kind of connect the energetics with where you are now to where they were then. That's fascinating. And I commend you for the work that you're doing in being a cycle breaker.
Thank you. Thank you.
And your mom too.
Yeah. Yeah. What's actually so beautiful is that every course that I have taught with the Shift Network, my mom attends. Yeah. Right. And so
I
even
love that. That makes me want to cry.
it's pretty beautiful. It's pretty stunning. And, last year we did one that was specific to generational
Yeah.
trauma. When I do the immersion course, we'll be coming back in and we'll be doing
Right.
the generational trauma material and how we unwind that. And I got to teach that with my mom there, right? With a photo sitting behind me of her parents. Right. It is. It's like chills worthy. It really is.
I have, I can't even express to you how, like, the beautiful energy that's coming in for this. And it's just such an honor for you to hold space and be able to educate and to teach and to help people with their own transformations, but also honor your own ancestors throughout this journey. Like, that's just is so beautiful. Like, it's so beautiful. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, like most often when I teach courses with the Shift Network,
Yeah.
it's a pretty robust mix of people
Yeah.
who are practitioners, whether they're energy workers,
Right.
therapists, nurse practitioners, acupuncturists, like lots of practitioners that are healers, that are light workers in one form or another.
Right.
And I would say about 50% are also people coming for their own healing, and
Yeah.
I want to say like just their own healing, but also who are transmitting that in your
Yeah.
own family legacies and how you're going to show up for your kids and healing wounds of the past and so forth. But I will always say that no matter who you are, the work always has to be here first, right? Like
Yes.
we have to do our own work. If we're going to be a practitioner that's going to lead others through these kinds of healing processes,
Yes.
if I weren't doing my own work, there is no way I could do this for others. And I know you know this.
I completely 100% agree with you. And I think it goes to anyone that's listening, and using discernment and looking at the qualifications of somebody who's teaching a course. And are they are they doing the walk? Like, are they doing what they say? And yes, especially right now and the way of pop-up spirituality kind of at times, we can see, and with AI too. Only I love AI, not I love AI, but sometimes I think people pop up and they say like they get a lot of education from AI and then they become like, oh, I'm a certified teacher, but are you? So,
Oh, I see the same thing, especially as someone who's been in the field of somatics for 30 years.
mm,
And when I watch on social media some of these videos of like quick hacks, like some,
yes.
5 somatic hacks to heal your nervous system. And I kind of go, oi, because,
Ooh.
right. But there was like, for me, one of the biggest learnings that I've had
Mm,
to take away from all of these years is slower is
mm,
wiser.
I like that.
You can't you can't bite all of this off at once. You will overwhelm yourself or you'll
So
overwhelm
true.
somebody else, right? And so, like, taking this one small bit at a time and a titrated journey, and trusting that our bodies will give us just the right next layer. I mean, whether you use an onion metaphor, I often use the artichoke metaphor, because if you're peeling one layer, one leaf at a time, there's a heart in the middle.
Yes. Oh, I love that one. I've never heard that. I always do the onion one.
After you hear, you're like, oh, it's always going to be an artichoke from now
I
on.
know from here on out, I'll be like, oh, the artichoke. I remember. But it's true. One layer at a time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I like that, slow and steady. And I do think one thing I do want to talk to you about, because this is something that I've definitely been focusing on lately, and I think it's amazing that you teach about this. So in your teachings, breath becomes both a diagnostic and healing tool. What are some of your favorite breath practices for calming the nervous system and reconnecting with the present moment?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to start for a moment just on that phrase, like breath can be a diagnostic tool. So when we look at how does the unresolved trauma, and I think it even like links back to a question you asked earlier of like, how do I know if I have trauma? Right.
True.
And so, breath can sometimes be a good indicator. And so, like, as we look at breath diagnostically, is my breath really shallow? Is my breath only in my upper chest? Is my breath really rapid? So we can look at pacing, at location, at quality of depth of breath as kind of an assessment tool of where my breath might be imbalanced. Now, when my
Mm,
breath is imbalanced, my nervous system is imbalanced, because the breath is the fastest way to bring balance to the nervous system. So when we look at what you ask, like, what's one of my favorite breath practices to balance the nervous system? It's something that we call in the yogic system samavriti, which means same movement. In the science of the study of breath, we call it resonance frequency breath or coherence breathing. And basically, what we're looking at is that we are creating an even length of the breath between your inhale and exhale. So the breath is a marker for our nervous system, because our inhales are always going to key in a little bit of the sympathetic nervous
mm,
system. Our exhales will bring in a little bit of the parasympathetic nervous system. And remember that healthy vagal tone is the rhythmic capacity to move between sympathetic and parasympathetic. So when we breathe rhythmically, we are restoring nervous system balance. So something like a 5 count breath in and a 5 count breath out would be an example of a balancing breath practice.
mm.
Another diagnostic for the imbalances in the nervous system is, let's say I'm breathing, but I'm always emphasizing the inhale, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
even sound that
I'm like,
good. Just watching your face when I did it, right? Like, it sounds shocking, but it's going to
yes.
key in more sympathetic activation, anxiety, restlessness, irritability, anger. Conversely, if our breath is always heavy on the exhale,
Yeah.
we're going to feel more depressed, heavy, despairing, hopeless. And so when we simply shift to rhythmic inhales and exhales, and one more layer to that, in and out of your nose. Because if you watched both of those imbalanced breaths, they were both right in the mouth
Right. Right.
or out the mouth. And when we breathe in and out of the nose, we're actually adding a layer of purposeful resistance to the breath because the holes in the nose, they're smaller and they require more effort, purposeful, good effort,
Mm,
resistance effort, so that our lungs actually get to expand and contract fully.
I really like that. Just I find breath work to be so fascinating, and every time like more and more I learn about it, it's like it's such a valuable tool, but it's so easy to do. But I think we forget because it's just a natural, mechanism. But then when you're talking about, I'm like, like it's just, but it's I love it. I love
Yeah.
breath work. I love it. So you also encourage people to share their stories. So your final course, and I know that you're midway through the course, but your final course module invites people to create their own resilience action plan. What does post traumatic growth look like to you, and how can we begin to claim our own healing as a soul mission?
Mm, I love that. I even just, kind of hearing that in both its kind of etymological manners. The word soul, like it's my one purpose mission, and the word soul, my soul driven mission. And
Mm,
one of my favorite definitions of the word soul comes from a Jungian analyst named James Hillman, who passed some time ago. But I had the opportunity to meet him and learn from him. And he said that he described the soul as the seat of meaningful experience, the seat of meaningful experience. And when we, gosh, I was just doing a session yesterday, and I feel like it's a potent one to kind of reference here for a moment. It was with an individual who experienced so much trauma, a very, very difficult childhood. And, when you look at kind of like our adverse childhood experiences of physical and emotional and sexual abuse
mm,
and emotional and physical neglect, and like she had a whole lot of all of that, right? An
right.
alcoholic parent and a family member that died via suicide, and like a lot of stress, a lot of strain, a lot of pain. And at one point there was this moment of like, like this despair voice came in of like, is it even possible to heal from this much trauma? And one of the things that I so appreciate about this individual, and this is what I call the resilience informed approach,
Mm,
that leads us towards post traumatic growth. And I'll define that in a moment. But when we look at the strength of this individual, this person has a mind that is very far reaching, that is very capacious, that can kind of think herself not only into the box, but can think her way out of the box, right?
mm,
Can sometimes get trapped by the power of her own bright mind, but also that same bright mind is capable of being bigger than the trauma itself, of basically seeing this big picture of who she has become as a result of her commitment to working through the hard stuff. And going back to the story of being a cycle breaker, right? Of feeling that bit by bit, as she's worked through layers of complex trauma, which is,
yeah.
an area of specialty that I have, which is really the repeated chronicity of trauma exposure, that even in the face of all that big tangled mess, there are these moments of creativity. There are these experiences of compassion. There is this deep well wishing part of her for herself, even for family members that were the sources of harm, for this world at large. And when we tap into that soul nature, self with a big capital S, we can also feel that the trauma, as hard as that was, or as the many traumas were, it doesn't have to totally define who we are. We're
Mm,
in charge of that. That's
yeah.
where meaning making comes in. That's where working with our mindset comes in. That's where post traumatic growth comes in, because we can start to see that not only does our trauma not have to totally define who we are,
Hmm.
doesn't have to define our future, who we're becoming, how we treat others, what our value system is. Right? So I
Yeah.
do a lot of values-based work in that final module, and in all of my work, and it will show up in the immersion work as well, because when we know who we are, no one can take that away from you, right? When you know who you are. And I think what trauma does is it can sometimes strip us of that deep knowing of who we are. And part of what we do in post-traumatic growth is we reclaim that. Right. And there's this phrase, I think, I'm trying to remember who said this. I think it might have been Jung, that said this, Carl Jung, who said that if you don't define who you are for yourself, the world will define you for you.
Yes. That's
Right.
so true.
So we take the time to get to know, who am I? What do I stand for? What are my values? What keeps me upright? Who do I want to be in the world?
Oh, I love that. I love that answer. And before I ask you the last question, if anyone is interested, because I know that your 7 week course is going on now, and by the time this post, it will be over, but I think you might be able to purchase it on demand, which is amazing. Tell us a little bit about the immersion program that's coming up in November.
Yeah, yeah. I think of the 7-week course, and yes, it's available on demand. And I actually recommend for folks that are interested in the immersion, like do the 7-week course, even
Yeah.
if you didn't do it live, because it's going to give you a flavor. And you might stop there, but if you want to do the immersion, like the 7-week course, you can think about an accordion. It's like got 7 really beautiful standalone pieces. The immersion is 26 weeks, and we stretch that out like an accordion, so we get to go really, really deep over 6
Yeah.
months. It's a little bit more than 6 months because we've got breaks in there. And the other thing to name is that I bring a robust, amazing team with me. So because there is encouragement to go deep. I mean,
Mm,
people share very intimate personal trauma healing stories
yeah.
in this group, and purposefully, because we weave together safe community spaces. We weave together opportunities to reduce the isolation that is so paramount in our world, right? The epidemic of loneliness. We build communities that are safe enough where we can feel that we belong as we are, that we don't have to fake it till we make it. We don't have to be superficial in order to have social belongingness. So we get to reclaim that there are spaces out there where we can be held, and we can also receive the support to become our wisest selves.
That sounds like a beautiful immersion experience. And I'm actually going to change the last question to piggyback off of kind of what you said with holding healing, a healing safe space for those that are sharing these complex trauma stories. So how does sharing our healing journeys, even imperfectly, become an act of liberation for ourselves and others?
That's beautiful, right? So there's a few parts to my response to that. One is that, and I was literally just teaching this today because I just came out of teaching week 5 of the 7-week course. And for those of you that go catch it on demand, you'll hear me say this in there. But one of the things that I teach about in today's lecture is this sense of how our bodies really respond to what is true. Right? Like, so if you think about a parent who's like really grumpy and in a bad mood, and their kid goes up and they're just like, "Why are you so grumpy?" And the parent goes, "I'm fine. What are you talking about?" How would that feel to the kid? Totally
Exactly.
confusing. Like, wait a second, I'm watching your body language, your voice tone, your emotional expression. I know you're not fine, but you're telling me I'm fine. What do I do
Right.
with that information? So think of your body as like the inner child that is basically responding beautifully to what's true, what's congruent. When an adult says to the child, "You're right, I'm kind of grumpy today. I had a hard night's sleep, you know, but I want you to know it's not about you and it's not your fault. And you don't have to take care of me. I've got this." But nonetheless, we're validating the child's emotional intelligence.
Right.
So when we are able to feel and speak what is true, what is authentic, our bodies and minds respond to what we call congruence. Our nervous system loves authenticity because there's something that lines up. It's not confusing. And this quality of, as we feel safe enough to be seen and accepted, even loved perhaps, as we are, what we would call this unconditional positive regard, to borrow from a man named Carl Rogers, right? He developed person-centered, client-centered psychotherapy. When we feel loved and accepted as we are, it allows us to emerge and grow. Like the unfinished business of the past in which we were rejected for who we were starts to resolve. And I feel that I can actually catch up more and more and be here in the present moment rather than stuck
Right.
recycling the wounds of the past.
I love that. Dr. Schwartz, it was truly has been amazing to speak with you today. For anyone interested, I recommend checking out her website. I'll make sure to link that. I know that she offers more than just a shift network. Like we said, she has 7 books. She has a lot going on. Thank you so much for the Karma Spiritual Spotlight series. It truly has been an honor to speak with you today.
Thank you so much for having me.